Hello there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. Superfly Comics Guy here, and the day has finally come. The day when I've got to read the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 by JMS. And now I am bringing a review to you guys. And this book had a lot to live up to. There's a lot of hype behind this series, but wow. Wow. This was some of the best and most refreshing Spidey material I've read in a long time. So, today I'm going to take you through the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through of the story where I can share my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations. And let me tell you, Spidey being my favorite character, I have a lot I want to talk about with this book. This might be a very long video, but I just have so much I want to say. So if you enjoy the video at any point, you know how to show it, and please feel free to leave your own thoughts down in the comments below as well. But with that out of the way, let's swing right into this adventure. Okay, starting off with the simple stuff. Here we have the standard cover to this omnibus. This is the Jeffrey Scott Campbell cover. This is the 2019 edition that I have, so this was the only cover available at the time. But this book has been reprinted last year, 2022, and with that, they introduced a direct market cover by Mike Deodato Jr., which I really like. I really like that direct market cover. If I had the choice, I would have picked that, but, you know, not going to buy a second copy of the same book just for a different cover, right? Let me show you the spine. Pretty cool there. White spine, which seems to be more common with modern books. And then the back, you still got your Marvel cover gallery here, and you're collecting Amazing Spider-Man. This is from the 1999 series when they renumbered it, 30 through 58, and then 500 through 514. So then they went back to the legacy numbering there. Cover price of $125 US, $158 Canadian. So let's flip this over, show you under the dust jacket here. And there we are. We got this wonderful sort of collage / mosaic piece by John Romita Jr. here. Let me show you that. I don't think it works particularly great for a cover, but I do really like that the issue from which this panel comes. So really nice there. But now let's get to the part that I really want to talk about, the inside of this book and the story. So let's go. Okay. So diving in to the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 by J. Michael Straczynski, or Straczynski, which would be the US pronunciation. So, my first thought when cracking this open was just, I can't believe I'm finally reading this, because I've been looking forward to this book for so long because it's got a lot of praise behind it. But I've been doing my best with my Amazing Spider-Man reading to sort of go in chronological order through my omnibuses as much as possible. So I started in 2018 with like the Silver Age Omnis, Amazing Spider-Man by Stan Lee. And I've been sort of reading in chronological order since then. So that meant I had to suffer through 4 omnibus volumes of the Clone Saga first before I got to this. But this really was my light at the end of the tunnel that kept me pushing. I just really wanted to get to this. And yeah, I'll just say right now, I may talk a lot in this video. Might be a pretty long video. But I promise I'll be avoiding spoilers as much as possible. It might seem at times like I'm giving away details or stuff like that, but trust me, I'm just going to be talking about some of the premise of some of the story bits here. Speaking of which, so we're in the early 2000s here, so relatively right after the Clone Saga, and this resets, I would say, a lot of what happened in the Clone Saga. A lot less zany storytelling, that's for sure, with a greater focus on a friendly neighborhood Spidey. but I'll touch more on that later. So by this point in time, we open up. Peter and MJ are actually separated. MJ is in LA trying to pursue an acting career, whereas Peter is still in New York City here, but he accepts a job as a teacher, a school science teacher, which is it's so perfect. It's such a great and logical progression for him. It's so nice to be able to see him get to be more of a role model outside of the costume, outside of the suit. And it really is just a really cool, full circle moment for Peter because, he started out as a high school student before he was bitten by the spider, and now he's teaching these kids, and he's reminded a lot of himself by these younger kids that he's teaching. Speaking of MJ and Peter, though, they're separated, but they're sort of trying to repair their relationship. And then, of course, there's that wonderful Parker luck at play there, because, for example, there's this bit where Peter wants to go visit MJ, MJ wants to go visit Peter. They each want to say something to the other, but then they get on opposing flights. She's on one flight, he's on the other flight, and it's just like, oh, come on. But yeah, their dynamic is really, really great in this omnibus for sure. So as I mentioned, this whole thing is written by JMS, or J. Michael Straczynski, who is also a writer for television and film, which makes a lot of sense because the main story, anyway, in this omnibus reads a lot like a screenplay, honestly. So generally, you're getting a mix of grounded street level stories, and then which are kind of like the day-to-day issues for Peter here. But then you have the main story as well, and that's where like a lot of supernatural elements start coming in, the big fights, the main events. So you got a little bit of both, a little bit of grounded and a little bit of supernatural. Now, speaking of that main story, it all sort of centers around this new character here known as Ezekiel, who encounters Peter very, very early on in the story. And Peter notices it's like, yeah, this older guy has very, very similar powers to me. And Ezekiel explains to Peter that his spider powers actually come from mystical, kind of totemistic forces. And he explains that there's actually a long lineage of spider people, and that Peter was actually destined to be bitten by that spider all those years ago. If you've read Jason Aaron's Ghost Rider, which happened after this, they kind of play around with a similar idea there too. Some kind of had an issue with this. Some people, I think, had an issue with this because it's like a retcon of the origin. But I mean, the themes are still there. But to be fair, I wasn't really in love with this idea either. I prefer the notion that the spider bite should be random, that it could have happened to anybody, and that's kind of part of what makes Spider-Man such a relatable character. But I mean, that whole thing with like spider totems and, destiny and all that, I kind of prefer to view it as a different perspective on how Peter got his powers, a hypothesis rather than sort of an absolute truth. And, the book kind of presents it this way too, so I didn't really mind. At the end of the day, it's still a spider bite, right? So speaking of supernatural forces, Ezekiel explains that because of these sort of mystical origins, there's going to be some supernatural forces that are coming after Peter, not least of which is a new villain known as Morlun, who's this insanely powerful, seemingly tireless villain who's solely focused on hunting down these spider people and draining their life force, which sounds pretty scary. And yeah, well, when you have a guy that can make Peter's spider sense do this, yeah, he's bad news. So much so that Ezekiel tells Peter to hide from Moreland, that Peter is massively outclassed. But if you know Spidey, you know that that's not an easy thing for him to do. And actually, this is a really good time to talk about Spidey's writing in this omnibus, which is great. And I don't just mean the comedy, which is fantastic, by the way. The quips in here got quite a few chuckles out of me, I'm not going to lie. But I'm talking about the writing being fundamentally indicative of who Spidey is as a character. In fact, there's this great quote early on in the book where Spidey just goes, "All I've ever asked is for one chance to try, to stand on my own 2 feet and give it my best shot. Succeed or fail, live or die, if I know I tried, then I can accept whatever happens." And man, this is so perfect. Because yeah, Peter will lose. He will occasionally get his butt kicked. But he is stubborn. He won't give up. He will push through. He will keep trying to protect the little guy, protect the ones that he cares about, all so that he can make his city a better place. And I just think that's so inspiring, so well captured in that one little quote. And it's one of the biggest reasons why Spider-Man is my favorite character. But another hallmark of great Spidey stories is that Peter's world and Spidey's world collide often. They're at odds with each other. There's a push and pull there. So we've seen that those themes be explored in movies like Spider-Man 2 or the 1990s animated series. And this isn't a new thing. Those themes have been around since the Silver Age, since the 60s, the Stan Lee run. In this run, we see that reflected kind of in Peter's job because, like I said, he's going out as Spidey. He's getting beat up, but then the next morning he has to supervise and teach a bunch of students. And, it takes a toll on him. And another thing that's explored is unintended consequences of those actions as Spidey, which is really interesting. They explore the idea that, bad guys have families too. So what happens when Spidey takes out these quote-unquote bad guys and then they're not there to provide for their families anymore? What happens then? And it's those kind of stories. There's this focus on the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man here. It's not just about defeating a villain and saving the day. He's interacting with civilians. He's helping them out. He's watching over them. And moments like that just reminded me of scenes from like All-Star Superman, for example. That connection to the city is so important because, it just makes the stakes that much more valuable, I suppose you could say. Speaking of friendly neighborhood, the series was coming out in the early 2000s, so there is also a 9/11 issue that they throw in here, which I think was really well done. It was tasteful. It focuses a lot on the ordinary heroes, the everyday heroes. So it's like you see what 9/11 does to Marvel's New York. It's like, yes, the superheroes are there helping out, but at the end of the day, it's the firefighters, the police officers, the medical workers that are saving the day every day. And I thought that was a nice way of handling that. I know some people kind of take issue, mixing politics with popular media, but I think it was well done here. And another thing, this might be the best version of 616 Aunt May I've seen yet, because that's one of the issues I had with her in like the early days. It's like she was just a frail old lady, but not so much here. There's a lot of great moments with Aunt May. She has a lot of interesting things to contribute here. Now, I don't think she's as great or as cool as Ultimate Universe Aunt May, but still a big improvement over how Aunt May has typically been portrayed in the Amazing Spider-Man books. Now, another thing I think this series does really well is with villains, this series does a great job of introducing new villains and not just relying on the obvious classics, which I think is kind of a common pitfall of a lot of big Spider-Man stories. So I already touched on Morlun, but there's a bit with Doctor Strange where he and Spidey take a visit to the astral plane because, you know, there's all these supernatural forces at play here. So Spidey needs the wisdom of an expert, let's say. And that visit to the astral plane ends up having a lot of unintended consequences, which I won't spoil, but if you've read Grant Morrison's Time and the Batman, it's kind of similar to that. There's so many wonderful callbacks to iconic moments from Spidey's history, just all throughout this series, really. There's this new villain known as Shatra, who's pretty unconventional. She kind of attacks Spidey's reputation rather than Spidey himself, which is interesting. During those bits, I will just say, if you suffer from arachnophobia, beware. Although if that's the case, I'm not sure why you'd be reading a Spider-Man book, but hey, who am I to judge? But yeah, in terms of other villains, we also get the introduction to Digger, who's like this weird amalgamation of like 13 murdered mob bosses who were buried together and then merged. Pretty weird, but I enjoyed that story too. And one thing I really like about a lot of the villain encounters in this book is that Spidey is constantly investigating and analyzing how he can beat his enemies. So he might get beaten at first, but then he'll sort of, you know, retreat for a bit, think about it, and then come back with just a plan and then just stick it to them. That's one of the things I liked a lot about the 1960s Spider-Man show, where like he would lose to a villain the first time, but then he would sort of go back to his home and like start doing some experiments in his lab and then come up with a new way to beat them. And it's just, I love seeing that scientific side of Spidey. Now, as far as the art in this omnibus goes, it's mostly done by John Romita Jr., who I think is generally quite good. I've mentioned before that he's kind of hit or miss for me. In this series, I think he does a really great job with some of the swinging scenes and some of the shots of the city. And he's really good at making different characters look distinct, just like his father, which, speaking of which, man, rest in peace, John Romita Sr. Far and away my favorite Silver Age artist, bringing Spider-Man to life in a way that just no one else was doing in comics at the time. And it sucks to think that we've lost now Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and now John Romita Sr. The pioneers that made Spidey who he is today. And it's just, they will sorely be missed, and rest in peace, John Romita Sr., for sure. But yeah, back to the art here. There's so many awesome covers, issue covers in this series. A lot of them are done by Jeffrey Scott Campbell, but some really smashing, just iconic covers. And there's plenty of homages also to Amazing Spider-Man 33. So you know when that happens, you know, Spidey trapped under a bunch of rubble, you know you're dealing with a good story, right? In terms of some gripes I have with the art, I think Spidey's suit sometimes looks a little weird, like kind of looks like armor and like shiny armor. And I think that's probably due to how it was colored. Not 100% sure. And sometimes John Romita Jr. draws Spidey kind of sickly looking sometimes with his proportions. He'll be like super duper skinny. Or there's this other thing which he likes to do where he draws Spidey with these aggressively angled legs, if that's the right way to describe it. And I always found that to be kind of weird. And then in the very, very last chunk of the book, Mike Deodato Jr. takes over for art, which we'll get to in a bit. But he's got a very, very different style. It's very dramatic, very moody. I think it looks pretty great, but ultimately it felt a little sterile to me. Like when I compared some of John Romita Jr.'s work here, which I don't think is always the most aesthetically pleasing, there's like a dynamism and a flow here that I didn't really notice as much when Mike Deodato was penciling the book, even though maybe aesthetically I preferred the Deodato style. I don't know. It was kind of interesting there. But Deodato sometimes has like a McFarlane sort of style to him with some of the poses he does with Spidey, and I thought that was pretty cool. But just when you thought it was all going so well, this story comes along. Sins Past. Now, if you don't know what Sins Past is, before this point, I've never read it, but I knew going in that it's almost universally hated by Spidey fans. But I figured I had to see it for myself and form my own opinion, that was the way to go. And here you can see some of that Mike Deodato Jr. art that I was talking about, and it looks really nice, but it comes across a lot colder than John Romita Jr.'s art. It's missing something. I still think it's really good, but I think I preferred the John Romita Jr. art. But anyway, in order for me to talk about Sins Past, I do have to talk about the original story of Gwen Stacy from the 70s. So if you don't know who Gwen Stacy is, she was not Peter's first love interest, but his first true love. So if you're not familiar with the story of Gwen Stacy, I'm going to talk about that here. So minor spoilers for a very, very old story, but I think a lot of people know what happened to Gwen Stacy. So yeah, Peter's first true love, and she tragically met her demise at the hands of the Green Goblin in the 70s. So the premise of Sins Past is that this lost letter from Gwen makes its way to Peter, indicating that apparently she had some big secret to tell him, but she was killed shortly after. And around this time, these mysterious twin assassins appear and start gunning for Peter. And Peter figures, well, this can't be a coincidence. This has to be connected somehow. So Sins Past kind of turns into this story, this mystery to uncover the meaning behind this letter and what actually happened and what this is all about. And when you finally find out, yeah, I gotta tell you, it's awful. This story really did not need to happen. It opens up a can of worms. It opens up a long closed story. It disrespects Gwen and her legacy. Her flashbacks, the way Gwen is written in this story, are so poorly written. MJ's character is made worse. And then there's this nightmare fuel panel of Green Goblin. To those who don't know the context for this might not seem that bad of a panel. But those of you who know, yeah, this is terrifying. And the way this is written, it's just some proper Clone Saga nonsense, as if the run simply was going too well. And they're like, you know what, we really need to throw in some kind of crazy off-the-wall story to really anger our fans. I don't know, like, what were they thinking behind this? It's like you're being prepared a gourmet meal by a Michelin star chef with all the freshest ingredients, and then right at the very end, the boss's kid comes over and takes a great big sizzling dookie on your dish. And it's just like, I really did not need that. So it sucks that this omnibus ends on such a sour note, but I gotta tell you, the rest of the book is truly amazing. No pun intended. All right, but now I want to quickly take you through some of the extras that you get in this omnibus. So you get some Spidey sketches, which is always wonderful. Various characters here. Some covers, some work in progress covers, but you also get some of the intros, the introductions that were found in some of the hardcovers from around this time, which is nice. You also get some scripts, which these ones I didn't really read, but also variants. There's that wraparound cover that we have on the board of this book, and also just some other sort of original art. Oh yeah, this is really cool. Just some callbacks to some of Spidey's classic moments. I don't want to spoil that, but it's really, really well done. Yeah, it's so cool because I've read all these issues, so being able to like make the connection to these bits. There's an homage to Amazing Spider-Man 33. Just great stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it for your extras, and then a bit of a breakdown of Sins Past, which I don't really want to get into. But after that, we finish off with some more cover sketches here, work in progress pages, black and whites, and that's the end of your extra section. As far as build quality, keep in mind I have the 2019 edition of this book, so it's not the newer reprint, but there is what my binding looks like. So really, really good quality. That means no gutter loss here. Although I should point out, you may notice that my copy has a bit of a misaligned sort of tailpiece here. If I show you the top, you'll see that it wasn't really quite aligned properly. It kind of sinks into the book there, but I didn't really think that was a big deal. So the pages in this edition I think are pretty great. I only ever really noticed minor instances of page bleed, and as I mentioned, the gutter loss is minimal, if there at all. But I will mention that the newer printing, the 2022 edition of this book, seems to have a lot more issues with build quality, so that might be something to keep in mind. But all good things must come to an end, and here we are at the end of this review. So to wrap up, if it wasn't obvious enough, I'm giving the strongest possible recommendation for this book. Whether you're a Spidey fan or a comics fan or a Marvel fan just generally, or a fan of the movies, this is so good, and a really good entry point for Spidey too. Normally for people curious about trying out Spidey comics, I always recommend Ultimate Spider-Man. But that series comes with the caveat of, you have to accept that Ultimate Spider-Man takes place in its own separate universe. But if you want some great main universe Spidey, then this is absolutely the way to go, especially if you're more inclined towards modern titles. This really is the best Spidey material I've read in a long while, especially after suffering through the Clone Saga books not too long ago. You can check out my reviews of those if you'd like. Its biggest weakness by far is that Sins Past story that's included at the very end. But the rest of it is truly spectacular. It displays a fundamental understanding of Spidey's most defining traits. There's so much that this book does right that it would be a shame to ignore it just because of that one awful story at the end. I will say the original printing here does seem to be the better quality edition. So if you have the choice between this one and the newer version, this one is better. But I do think the new printing is still available, but it seems to be starting to run pretty short. But yeah, man, 2000s Marvel to me is such a special thing because not just this series by JMS, but you had Bendis working on Ultimate Spider-Man and Daredevil and Alias and New Avengers and Brubaker's Captain America and Aaron's Ghost Rider and Planet Hulk, and Moon Knight was making a comeback. And then the movies on top of that, it's like, wow, 2000s Marvel was such a special time, and I feel like you don't see it appreciated enough. But anyway, that's been my very long review of the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 by JMS. Let me know what you thought about this book, this series, the review. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to catch you in another video real soon. So, you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.